Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We will continue our discussion on Nectar of Instruction. Start with text 1. Vacho vegam manasah krodha vegam jiva vegam udarupastha vegam etan vegan yo vishaheta dhiraha sarvam api mam prithvim sashishyat. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So, Srila Prabhupada writes pretty extensively for the first four texts. And you'll notice that they are called texts. In Upadeśāmṛta, they are known as mantras. In Bhagavad Gita, they are known as verses or shlokas. And the reason they're called texts is because they have been composed by, they're not part of the original Veda, so to speak. Right? So they have been composed by an acharya. And even though it is understood that any literature that further explains the Vedic concepts should be considered as non-different from Vedic literature. So that way Upadeśāmṛta is also Vedic, Bhakti Sastri Sindhu is also Vedic. But just for the distinction, these are called texts over here. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada uses the example of Maharaj Parikshit dealing with atonement. So this happens in the first chapter of the sixth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that in the end of the fifth canto there is a pretty extensive description of the hellish planets and all the kind of sufferings that is available for those who are performing different sins. And then Maharaj Parikshit asks, after hearing all this, that is there any way that one who has committed sins, is there any way for the person to negate the suffering? And Sukdev Goswami says, yes, you can atone for it. And there are Vedic processes for atonement like fasting, austerities, giving in charity, etc. So Parikshit Maharaj rejects that, right? And Prabhupada talks about the analogies to explain why he rejects that, like an elephant bathing. An elephant will bathe and then again come back and throw mud on it. Or a thief will commit crimes and the police will catch it, but when the police leaves it, it will again commit crime. Or in Christianity, people go on a regular basis to confess for their sins, and after confessing, they're given absolution from the sins, but then they go and commit other sins and commit confessions again. So the point that Parikshit Maharaj is making, Prabhupada wants us to understand, is that as long as there is the tendency to perform sinful activities, sins will be performed. So simply atonement is just a temporary band-aid. And that then leads us to the question of what is real atonement. So real atonement is awakening our dormant Krishna consciousness. That's the austerity, that's real austerity. Because with that, one's tendency to commit sins are also eradicated. Right? So Prabhupada talks about the austerities understood in a traditional sense. Things like celibacy, mind and sense control, austerity, truthfulness, renunciation. So these are all that you will see as part of karma, gyan and astam. And then pancharatrik tapasya, which Srila Rupa Goswami recommends for devotees, which is essentially the do's and the don'ts of spiritual life. That is, the do is to practice bhakti under the guidance of Guru in the association of devotees, and the don'ts is to follow the four regulative principles. And then Srila Prabhupada talks about the application of it. Now, one thing that you will see that in the first four texts, uh, Srila Prabhupada writes his own purports and also takes borrows from Bhakti Siddhanta's. Bhakti Siddhanta wrote a book called Anuvrata, in which he writes commentary on the first four texts of the Nectar of Instruction. So he also borrows from that. So Srila Prabhupada talks uh, about the different pushings and how to solve it. Uh, and we'll discuss each one of them in greater details. And then he talks about Bhakti Siddhanta's Anuvriti's commentary, where Bhakti Siddhanta he uh, kind of groups it into three kinds of urges of the body, mind, and speech. So for the speech, there is there is the there is a prajalpa. Then for the mind, there is krodh or anger, and for the body, there is the tongue, belly, and genitals. For the mind, there is anger and unrestricted attachment, right? So again, when we cover them, we will blend in both the commentaries of Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Okay, so when we look at the text, we see that in the verse Vegam, our urges are repeated 5 times. So on a more humorous aside, one of the devotees giving a lecture was saying that if you have to actually see the Vegams in action, you should go to Las Vegas. And there all the Vegas are in full flow there. So Vegas are essentially pushings. So literally it means that they push one way against the better judgment. So the first 2 lines list the 6 Vegas, the 6 urges. Vacho Vegam, which is speaking, Manasa Vegam, which is of the mind, Krodha Vegam, anger, Jiva Vegam, which is tongue or tasting, then Udara Vegam, which is belly or eating, and Upastha Vegam, which is genitals and sex. And as Bhaktisiddhanta says, that these 6 Vegas actually correspond to the to body, speech, and mind. They also correspond to the 3 koshas, to the 3 levels of consciousness. Right? So there is so at a very basic level, there is Anamoya. So Anamoya consciousness says that one simply looks at everything from the perspective of food. Right? This is a basic animal consciousness, that they look around and they generally ask themselves 2 questions: is this food for me, or am I food for it? And that's what determines their how they perceive the surrounding. Right? So tongue or jiva is in that consciousness. That can I eat this? Is this palatable, or can I not eat it? Then pranamoya is the next level, which is there is an awareness of life, that yes, I live. So they make the distinction in this consciousness between living and non-living. So there is vachu, udara, and upas. So speaking, belly, and genitals. Right. So one procreates so that one can continue the legacy of life. Similarly, one speaks in acknowledgement of the existence of pran. Right? One will not speak to stones, one will speak to somebody else that is also able to respond. And udar, as we'll see later on, is the sense of satiation of life. That life essentially, at a fundamental level, is derived based on the sense of fulfillment of the belly.
And then higher than that is Jnanamoya, which is intellectual. There is awareness of the finer things. Right? This is begins from the human form of life, and Manasa Vega and Krodha Vega. These two pushings are at a jnana level. Right? So the ability to mentally speculate and the ability to feel anger. And as we'll see, anger actually is just a symptom. It's a symptom of something that is more deeper buried in one's intellectual awareness. So the recommendation in this is that one should tolerate. So tolerate means that wait for them to go away. The recommendation is not that one should eradicate them. Now, ideally, that would be better, but from a practical perspective, we see that these urges, they're buried so deeply in our koshas. Like Annamaya, that is the basic awareness of life. Pranamoya, Jnanamoya. So they are so deeply buried in our consciousness that it is impossible to make them go away. So then what do you do? You try to control them. You try to tolerate them. And the nature of these urges are that they are like waves of an ocean. So they come and they go. And sometimes they may be stronger. So there may be a situation where a person is sitting in front of a table filled with food, and then the jiva vegam is very strong at the time. Or one is in the company of opposite sex and the upastha vegam is very strong. Or one is getting insulted and the krodha vegam is strong. But then when that situation changes, that vega, it becomes weaker. It doesn't go away, but it becomes weaker. So the art of tolerating is to understand that this will go away. So when one is strongly hit by any one of these six vegas, then meditating on the fact that it's just a wave, that it is here now, and the next moment or the next day, next hour, it will be gone. So all I have to do is to tolerate it while it is here for the time that it is here. And that is Rupa Goswami's very, very practical recommendation for neophytes. So this verse is for people who are just starting their journey in spirituality. Now, it's not that this is not effective for advanced devotees. It's for them also. For them, it comes more naturally. But for those who are starting, this is a quality that Rupa Goswami says that we should cultivate. Now, see that in this, there is no Krishna. There is no spirituality per se. He says you can be a spiritual master to the world, but does not speak specifically about spirituality or religion, because this is in the category of morality. That one who is able to control these six vegas is to be considered to be a moral person. And even if one is controlling all the six vegas, does not mean that the person is now a spiritual person. But as we discussed in a previous class, morality becomes the springboard for spirituality. Why are these vegas over there? Because of anarthas. And what are anarthas? Anarthas are contaminations. In Nectar devotion, we studied that how by performing activities, bija, we also lay the seed of that future activity. If we steal, then that seed of stealing, it gets implanted in a subtle body and it stays as an anartha. So the next time that opportunity comes, then instinctively the person will be
inclined to stealing because that propensity has been planted. So in this way, over our past many lives, we have accumulated lots of anarthas. And this is how these anarthas manifest in terms of these pushings. Now separately, as we perform our devotional service, these anarthas begin to get removed, which is why Sukdev Goswami says that that if you have to remove these from the root, then perform spiritual devotional service. But at this time, Rupa Goswami is talking about not really about eradicating them, but tolerating them. Now, why does Rupa Goswami begin the NOI with this verse? And because we understood that the verses are on a grade, so to speak. He begins with a lower level and goes to a higher level. But he right away begins with saying that such a person is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So he's giving the qualification of a Jagat Guru. Now, if somebody is going to start at the level of becoming a Jagat Guru, it will be difficult for a person to make that leap. That here I am completely materially absorbed, and the first thing Rupa Goswami is saying that become a Jagat Guru. Right? So, how do we understand this apparent gap? So, let's walk. Rupa Goswami is extremely logical, so let's watch the logic that he wants to convey. First point we have to understand is control of the senses is the first step in spirituality. If somebody has uncontrolled senses, then the pursuit of spirituality will be very difficult. Right? If somebody says, I have to eat meat, I can't control myself. Very difficult to pursue spirituality. So first step is control of the senses. And this verse is the beginning of Abhidaya. So again, we had last time discussed how NOI talks about the practice of devotion. Right. So essentially what this verse is giving us, the very first step in the practice of spirituality. So clearly it is intended for a neophyte. Right. Then why talk about the exalted platform of becoming a Goswami? Now, to understand this, let's take shelter of another book that Rupa Goswami wrote and we read, which is the Nectar of Devotion, where it is mentioned that Abhidaya begins with when one takes shelter of a bona fide Guru, Guru Padya Ashraya. Of the 64 Angas of Bhakti, so Guru Padya Ashraya is when one takes shelter of a Guru. That is when one's devotional life begins. Before that, it is practicing or preparing for it. So from this we can understand that when a person is beginning their spiritual life, they need to take shelter of a Guru. Now, who is a qualified Guru? This verse is talking about that. Right? Not so much saying that you should cultivate Vachuvega, Manasa, Krodhavega, but more so it is saying that you need to take shelter of somebody who is cultivating Vacho, Manasa, Krodhavega. It's because the shelter of the Guru is the single most important aspect of commencing a spiritual life. So people often ask these questions, there are so many Gurus, how do we know who to take shelter of? And it's a valid question. Different Gurus are promising different things, they're conveying different philosophies, etc. Now, at this point, Rupa Goswami is not talking really about the philosophical aspect of the Guru's teachings, but the qualities of the Gurus. So these are the qualities that can be seen. Does the Guru controls one's anger, belly and genitals? Does the Guru, what kind of talk does the Guru do? Based on that, one is able to approach a bona fide Guru. As it's strongly recommended that one should first evaluate the Guru. and only then take shelter. Just like it's strongly recommended for the guru to evaluate the prospective disciple and then give shelter. So when the evaluation phase is going on, then the disciple is recommended to look for these qualities, right? Because just somebody is wearing a saffron cloth, holding a danda, or wearing a tilak, and these days it may be just me, but I noticed that people are becoming very, very um, creative in terms of the tilaks. Some of the tilaks are like works of art, and they have so many things in them. They have the sun and the moon and the stars, and they're technicolor, multicolor, red, yellow, green. So the whole tilak looks like it looks like a collage of so many things. But just the cloth and the danda and the tilak, that doesn't make one qualified spiritual master. The qualification of the spiritual master is that he should be dhira. Right? Dhira Prabhu. Krishna says, Dhira Statna Mueti. The first instruction to Arjun with the same line that he speaks to Arjun, saying that that's the person that you need to take shelter of. Now, at the same time, there is also the instruction that one should also begin to develop these qualities. Right? So a person reading this verse might say, I'm just a small devotee trying to practice. I have no desires to become the spiritual master for the entire universe. So then I don't have to worry about these six qualities. No. Even if you're not the guru to the universe, you are still a guru to yourself. If you are grahastha, you're still a guru to your family. Right? So whether you like it or not, everybody is a guru. So one should still aspire to develop these qualities in oneself. Right? So these qualities one must begin to cultivate in oneself. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives three general overarching points, and these kind of form the basis of what Prabhupada speaks. As one, he says that the real knowledge comes from the Vedas. So Prabhupada's purports, whatever Rupa Goswami is saying. So when Rupa Goswami says, is saying this, Avacho Vegam Manasokrodha Vegam, this is not Rupa Goswami sitting and down and thinking this are six good qualities. Right? This is Rupa Goswami having listened to the instructions of Krishna in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he having studied the scriptures, the writings of the previous acharyas. So we made this point that the instructions that Mahaprabhu gave to Prakashananda Saraswati, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, he extracted the essence of that. In a way, he is extracting the essence of the Vedas. So it is important to understand that these are Vedic instructions. These are not coming from just some Babaji sitting in Vrindavan. Partly true, Babaji coming from Vrindavan, but not just that. But it is coming from Krishna himself through Mahaprabhu's instructions and through the Vedas. Second point Prabhupada makes is that practice makes perfect. So because these are intended for practicing devotees, Abhiday, and the only way to understand these instructions is to start practicing it. So in the more philosophical aspects of the scriptures, some of the messages that are given are more for our philosophical understanding. What is the position of Krishna? What are his energies, etc. But when it comes to Abhiday, the instructions are specifically for practicing. And practice makes perfect means that one cannot simply say, okay, from tomorrow onwards, I am Krodha Vegam. That I am going to completely resist the pushings of anger. But what one can do is that from tomorrow onwards, I will begin to resist it. So it's moving the needle slowly and slowly, but consistently. Practice over and over again. One day you fail, second day you fail, third day you succeed a little bit. So these are overarching instructions to practicing devotees, and that's why they're called practicing. They have not perfected it. Third point Prabhupada makes is, and this is the focus in Vaishnavism as a whole, is not to suppress, not to negate, but to engage the senses. And if you suppress the senses, they will come back again. If you negate it, they will continuously trouble you. So the process that is given is to re-engage them. So on their own, the senses are unfavorably engaged when they are relating to the material world. But if we are able to re-engage them in spiritual endeavors, then the senses are pacified. The nature of the senses is that they require gratification. Jiva requires taste. So instead of saying, and there are certain subsects that's like Jains, right? They say that we will not eat any palatable food, right? And basically they are negating the tongue. But for devotees, it is, we will only use our tongue to taste prasadam. The prasadam can be palatable, and it should be palatable, right? So this is not negating the senses, but engaging them properly to pacify them. Prabhupada then reveals the secret of Krishna consciousness, which is engage the senses to control the urges as opposed to the denial of the senses. This is what makes the process of bhakti so much more so much more practical and also pleasurable. And Prabhupada gives some practical tips to his disciples. So sadhana, practice, practice, practice. And it's okay to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but at least that 2 steps should always be there. Then become so busy in services there is no time or energy left for indulging of the other senses, right? And this, at some point, everybody has experienced that if you're busy in one thing, then you don't have time for another thing. As students, if you're busy in studying, you don't have time for anything else. So similarly, as practicing devotees, if we take on services that we like and keep us busy, then not much time for Vacho Vegam and Sakrodha Vegam. Chanting. This is self-explanatory. Taking shelter of Lord Balaram. So Lord Balaram represents the spiritual strength of Krishna. Then humility. Right? Once the disciple went to Prabhupada and said, I find it difficult to chant. And Prabhupada said, even I find it difficult to chant. And he was a little surprised because he thought that Prabhupada was perfect in everything. And maybe Prabhupada was perfect. He was saying it out of humility. But the point he was making is that it will always be difficult. You should expect it to be difficult. If it is not difficult, that means you're not doing something right. But that should not discourage you. Then the understanding that ultimately these senses can only be controlled by Krishna. And because these are not our senses, right? They are Krishna's senses. Why does Krishna give the jiva these senses? Because it lets them engage in devotional service. Right? There's this verse in the Bhagavatam where it's said that, let my eyes only see the deity form of the Lord, let my ears only see the glorification of the Lord, let my nose only smell the tulsi leaf. So it's a way of basically saying that that's the real purpose of the senses. So ultimately, when we align them to the original purpose, that is the only way
this impossible will become possible. As long as we think these are our senses, it will be impossible. So we'll go a little bit deeper into each of these. So Vacho, Vegam. So speech must be used in the service of Krishna. Prabhupada gives the analogy of the croaking of a toad that attracts the snake. Right? So people talk about material things while the serpent of time is swallowing them. And makes the same point again, that the meaning of control speak is Krishna Katha. So it does not mean that you don't speak, but what it means is, as far as possible, when you speak, it is used in the service of Krishna. The power of speaking, and this is also to some extent the power of chanting. That there was a disciple of Omkar, Omkar Das Prabhupada, early disciple, and he was diagnosed with a terminal disease. Right, so he came to Prabhupada. He said, "I'm going to die. How can I perfect my life?" And Prabhupada gave him Babaji initiation. Right, he's the only person in the history of ISKCON who got Babaji initiation. So he took Babaji initiation, went to Mayapur, and he started performing Nirjan Bhajan, sitting alone, chanting 24 hours a day, right, and waiting for the disease to take over and for him to die. But that never happened. And he waited and waited, and he chanted and chanted, and death didn't come. So then finally he went back to the doctor, and then the doctor checked him and said, "I don't see any symptoms of the disease. The disease is completely gone." Right? So that's the power of chanting. Now, of course, unfortunately in Omkar's case, that when his health got restored, he left ISKCON, he went back to America, and he disappeared, never to be heard again. And that was the other part of one's past attractions that manifests. But this is the power of the mercy of the Guru, Holy Dham, and the mercy of the holy name, which manifests as Vachu, as speaking. So the use and misuse of speech at a gross level, it is prajalpa, it is just gossip. At a subtle level, one begins to talk about more philosophical topics. And at a more spiritual level, the use of speech is japa or Krishna Katha. So the recommendation of Rupa Goswami is to go from prajalpa, go beyond philosophical talks, and to Krishna Katha. Second is manovegam. So the mind has two tendencies. It is avirodha priti. So it has a strong attraction for enjoyment. And it is virodha yukta krodha. And it experiences anger at frustrations. So avirodha priti results in sankalpa. So when the mind, it experiences enjoyment, then it makes this determination that this is what I should do. Okay. So somebody went to a restaurant, had very good food. Now the mind says, okay, this is a good place for me to enjoy. So that's sankalpa. Whenever I have time, I'll come to the restaurant. Whenever possible, I'll come to the restaurant. Conversely, someone went to the restaurant and they had really bad food. So anger and that frustration, vikalpa, that I will try and avoid this restaurant at all cost. So the nature of this mind is acceptance and rejection. The process of sankalpa and vikalpa. So the mind in this way, it is the frenemy. It's more contemporary word as a friend and enemy. It is an enemy if one is not able to train the mind, then the consequences are not good. What is an example of that? One example is that if one has an uncontrolled mind, then at the time of death, wherever the mind goes, that determines your next birth. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajate antakalevaram. Whatever you think at the time of death, that's what you do. So if all your life your mind has just been sankalpa vikalpa, I should get this, I should not get this, then that's what will predominate at the time of death. An unrestricted mind destroys relationships. So this is at a more practical perspective. That if one simply follows the dictates of the mind, and the mind says, I need to do this. So as parents, one understands that very often you have to do things that you may not like, but are for the welfare of your children. Or in a relationship, the wife understands that very often I have to do things that are good for the relationship, not necessarily things that I enjoy. But if the mind is unrestricted and says I only do things that I like and reject things that I don't, then relationships will be destroyed. An uncontrolled mind brings inattentiveness in hearing the scriptures, in chanting, and in worshipping. Right? So here we see the connection being made to spiritual practices, sadhana. That when we do sadhana bhakti, then it manifests in these ways: deity worship, japa, study of the scriptures. But if the mind is not controlled, then all these processes will be impacted. Most of all, it will make the devotee's practice unsteady, asthira. So it keeps it at a superficial level. And Prabhupada says, materially an uncontrolled mind results in insomnia, excessive dreaming, and one wakes up in the morning tired and exhausted. And when the mind is controlled, then the next thing will be that the speech and the senses will also be uncontrolled. Now, a slight advantage, or maybe a big advantage in the age of Kali, is that the thoughts of the mind, they do not lead to any sinful reactions. So if one is thinking sinful thoughts, then in the earlier ages, they were considered to be as good as performing sinful activities. So in the earlier ages, if the mind was thinking sinful thoughts, one would have to suffer the consequences of it as if they performed those activities. But if the mind was thinking pious thoughts, then they were not considered. In the age of Kali, it's the opposite. That if one thinks pious thoughts, then it is as if they're performing pious activities, and they get the credit for that. But if they're thinking sinful thoughts, then there is no karma attached to it. Now, of course, it does not mean that one takes shelter of that and says that let me only think pious thoughts and not perform pious activities, because that becomes hypocritical. Or one thinks that okay, I can think all the sinful thoughts and there's no karma attached to it. But practically speaking, what you think, the thinking, feeling, willing, doing cycle is always running. That what we think, we start feeling it, and what we feel, we will, and then essentially we do it. So in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna says that it is very difficult to control the mind, and then Krishna says to Arjun, Vairagya, Abhyasena Chakwantya Vairagya. So he gives two things: Abhyas, practice, and Vairagya, detachment. And then that's how, from the biggest enemy, the mind can become the biggest friend. So how to make the mind your friend? So again, because this is for practicing devotees, Prabhupada gives instructions that one can apply. Wake up early morning, worship Guru and Krishna. So that sets your day properly. Chant. So by chanting, one's consciousness is cleared. Study of the scriptures is a powerful way to control the mind, especially the tendency for speculation. Listening to lectures and bhajans, and the focus is practice. As this is done day after day, the mind becomes more and more amenable to control there. Prabhupada says the proper attitude is very important. Right? That's where everything comes together. So there are so many ways that Krishna has made himself available to us, and they have been magnified by the mercy of devotees, by Srila Prabhupada, the other devotees. So there are lectures, there are different, some are philosophical lectures, some are lectures on pastimes, there is deity worship, there is Harinam Sankirtan, so many ways. But all of it can only be useful to us if we approach it with the proper attitude. Like somebody might be living in Vrindavan, but with a karmi consciousness. And somebody may be living in the most karmi place, but with a Vrindavan consciousness. And the difference is, what is the attitude that one has, right? So third is anger, krodha, vegam. So in 262, Krishna makes this point about the genesis of anger, right? Dhyayato sangas kama krodha. So when the mind thinks, it develops attachment, then that attachment results in lust and hankering for it. And that hankering results in anger, because if it is unfulfilled, there is frustration, which becomes anger. If it is fulfilled, there is disappointment, which becomes anger. So, by nature, the cultivation of devotional qualities is the famous third verse of Shashtastakam, Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sahishnena Amanina Manadena Kirtanya Sadahari. And that the devotee by natural is, by nature is trying to cultivate humility, which is a great pacifier for anger, right? So the training is that one must tolerate and control anger, right? So one can control anger by philosophical means. When one is put in an adverse situation, then our natural reaction to unfavorable situations is anger. But when we look at it from a philosophical means, right, somebody cuts us off on the highway, or somebody is doing injustice to us. But from philosophically, if we think that this is just an ongoing cycle of karma, the reason something is happening to me is because I did something. And also the reason that something has happened to me is now I don't have to suffer for it later on. Right? So one looks at it philosophically, then it pacifies one anger. Then Narad Muni talks about fake anger, because sometimes anger is needed for self-preservation. One needs to get angry. One is being ill-treated. One is getting unfairly treated. And there's the pastime of Narad Muni and the serpent, where Narad Muni recommends to the serpent that you don't have to bite, but you can show your fangs. And so the difference between anger and fake anger is that one does not get controlled by anger. Right? When one is controlled by anger, then it bewilders the mind. But when otherwise, one is using the anger in to achieve an end. Then also there's understanding that forgiving does not mean condoning. Right? Sometimes people say that too much humility may result in becoming a doormat, right? And being unfairly treated by everyone. Not really that. Right? It does not mean one should not speak up for themselves. Does not mean one should not contradict others, but without being under the control of anger, right? In the mood of service as opposed to the mood of retaliation. And finally, and this is for more advanced devotees, anger can be used in the service of Lord. And for example, Arjun used his anger in the battlefield, to serve Krishna. Hanuman burned Lanka. He used his anger to serve Lord Ram. Spiritual masters, they chastise the disciples, and they do it as a service to
to the disciple. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when Jagai Madai, they hurt Nityanand, Lord Nityanand, then to show his protection and his concern for his devotees, Mahaprabhu expressed transcendental anger. So one can use that in the service of the Lord and his devotees. Fourth is Jiva Begam, which is the urge to uh, taste. So this Bhakti Siddhanta says that this comes in the category of body, and the body Vegas can be divided into tongue, belly, and genitals. And then he makes this point that they are situated in a straight line. So from the tongue, the belly, and from the belly, the genitals. So at the top of the line is the tongue. So if one controls the tongue, the belly is controlled, and if the belly is controlled, the genitals are also controlled, right? So if one eats a lot of tamasic food, it automatically results in a lot of perverse sexual desires. And if one consumes alcohol, eats a lot of meat, you see all these things will tend to go together. People who are eating a lot of meat, consuming a lot of alcohol, they also have a lot of obsession with different kinds of sexual activities. So if the tongue is controlled, the belly gets controlled, and so does the genitals. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it said the person who's running here and there to gratify the palate is always attached to the desire of the stomach and genitals and is unable to attain Krishna. And the point is made is that then such a person, spiritual advancement is difficult. So Prabhupada says we should chant the prayer, eat in proper quantity, and not allow the tongue to decide whatever we eat. Not eat food that was not cooked with proper consciousness and has not been offered to Krishna. Right? So Prabhupada also talks in the purport that the food is in the mode of ignorance. So this is based on the 16th, 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. That food in the mode of ignorance, like meat and intoxicants, food in the mode of passion, excessively spicy chili food, and food in the mode of goodness, which is vegetable, creepers, etc. Right? And interestingly, he says that whether it is in the mode of ignorance, passion, or goodness, it is Jiva Begam. Because even if one may be saying that I'm a pure vegetarian, but nevertheless they may be hankering after the taste of vegetarian food. Like once a disciple came to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, for my life I've been a pure vegetarian. Right? Prabhupada said, what's the big deal? Even pigeons are vegetarians. So the point Prabhupada says is that one should become a Krishnatarian, which is one should only hanker for Krishna Prasad, because all of the foods have varying amounts of karma attached to them. Udara Vegam, which is belly. Now, interestingly, the belly is in the category of pranamoya, and it is closely linked with the intrinsic desire to live or exist. So we can see that when people have existential crisis, they tend to compensate by overeating. Like when they're going through emotionally disturbing times, or when they're under a lot of stress. There's actually, I think, a term also that talks about this, like stress related eating, which is because of this reason that whenever they feel that their existence is being threatened, the compensation it is to fill the belly, not just because they are hungry, but because at a psychological level they're compensating for their fear of existence, right? So lusting after taste is jiva vegam, and lusting after satiation is udara vegam. So fasting is a sign of detachment. Right. So in various Ayurveda it said that one should not fill the stomach more than half with food, like and a quarter with water and a quarter with air. And regular fasting is recommended, because just like Udar Vegam is attachment, fasting is detachment. So one begins to control that vega, and best is to fast on spiritually potent days like Kadashis and Janmashtami, etc. Eating in a regulated way helps, right? Like some people will eat whenever they are hungry. But if one establishes a regulation that I only eat 2 times a day, 3 times a day, once a day, and regardless of what the body is telling them, if one only eats at a time, then that automatically promotes Udara Vegam. So Prabhupada says one should take prasad at scheduled time, then should not eat in restaurants or sweet-made shops to satisfy the whims of the tongue or belly. If you stick to the principle of taking only prasad, the urges of tongue and belly can be controlled. Right? So elsewhere it is said that how the consciousness of the cook enters that food, especially grains. So when you eat out, even if it is vegetarian food, then it's not prasad. The people who are cooking it have different consciousness, and when we eat, we also take that. We also take that consciousness. The children have a lot of attachment to the cooking of their mothers because of the love of the mother. When the mother cooks, regardless of what she's cooking, the prominent consciousness of love and caring, that is transmitted through food. So this one can experience in their own lives, that even when they are grown up and they have gone and maybe maybe the wives cook much better food, maybe the restaurants cook much more tastier food, but one still hankers for the mother's food because of this, because of the body instinctively remembers that consciousness that they got. So similarly, it happens in the negative way also, that in commercial enterprises, the consciousness is either rajasic or tamasic, right? And that enters the food and the person who eats it. Spiritual fasting is recommended. Prabhupada says that best is to be a yogi, which is to control what one eats. Otherwise, one becomes a bhogi, which is one starts to want to enjoy, and ultimately one will become a rogi. One will begin to be diseased both materially and spiritually. Okay, so the last is the prastha vegam. So again, the same point is made that how the tongue, belly, and genitals are situated in a straight line, and there are. And this is just representative, it's by no means exhaustive, but Prabhupada gives us some aspects of sex life that are to be strictly avoided and are considered illicit sex. So thinking, including dreaming about items related to sex life, discussing about topics related to sex life and women or men. So I think in this case, generally it is men about women, but one can understand it's the other way around also. Reading prohibited literature, associating with the opposite sex or the same sex in that mood in a sexual way, hearing about related topics, looking at women, watching movies, illustrations, pornography, etc. It's interesting that more than 60% of the internet traffic uh, is actually devoted to pornographic um, content, right? And Bhagavad Gita, Arjun makes this point to the importance of chastity of women, that how when the women of the family are polluted, then comes unwanted progeny, and then the degradation of the society. This is not to say that only women are accountable for this, but it's a joint, it's joint accountability. So how will the woman get polluted? Because the men pollute them, right? So it's that understanding that it's a joint accountability. Then talking intimately with women. Mahaprabhu had a disciple, Chota Haridas, and he was an excellent singer, favorite of Mahaprabhu. But once he spent excessive time talking intimately with the woman, even though his mood was not that, but Mahaprabhu, just to set an example, he basically cast him away. And then sexual endeavors, these are more gross, that actually planning.
and trying to engage in sexual acts. So ultimately, in Krishna consciousness, the mood of a devotee is to have Krishna conscious children within the institution of marriage. So here again, the focus is not so much on denying it, because that would be unnatural, but using it properly. So sex outside marriage is illicit. Sex just for the sake of carnal enjoyment is considered illicit. Too much meditating on sex-related activities, planning for it, or leaving oneself vulnerable to it would lead to illicit activities. The proper way to use one's genitals in the service of Krishna is to engage with one's wife in a Krishna conscious way, uh, because the children of the devotees are also souls that are looking for making advancement in their spiritual life. In the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that when a yogi's practices are left incomplete, he gives him an opportunity to take birth in a devotee family. Right? And so how will he take birth in a devotee family if devotees are not having children? But it is not really in the mood of self-enjoyment, but as a service to Krishna. So conclusion in terms of the theme of the NOI is that you can serve only one master, right? So there are two masters, the senses and Krishna. Those who serve the senses are known as Godas. Like Go means cow, Go means senses also, and Das means servant, right? So they are Godas or Radanta Go, and they are servant of the senses. And those who serve Krishna are Goswami, right? Swami means master. So they are the master of their senses. They are controlling their senses, and such people are qualified to become a spiritual master. So conclusion, that one who controls the 6 urges automatically controls the senses and is called a Goswami. Control of the senses does not mean the denial, but their regulated use in the service of Krishna. Right? This is a very important point. That, as I mentioned, that the Mayavadis say that the senses should be completely denied. Stop the engagement. Neti, neti, neti. The Shunyavadis say the senses don't even exist. Right? But both of them are not sustainable. What is sustainable is not to deny them but regulate them in the service of Krishna. And Prabhupada makes this powerful point that what happens if you're not able to control the senses? Right. So the point is that yes, one may not want to become a spiritual master for the universe, but there are other aspects to it also. That even for practicing devotees, this control of the senses are needed. Right. So Prahlad Maharaj, a great devotee of Krishna, he makes this point that for those who have decided to continue their existence in this material world for the gratification of the senses, there is no chance of becoming Krishna conscious, nor by personal endeavor, by instruction from others, or by joint conferences. They are dragged by the unbridled senses into the darkest region of ignorance, and thus they madly engage in what is called chewing the chewed. Right? A very dire, gloomy picture is paid by Prahlad Maharaj. Right? That not only do you have no chance of becoming spiritual, but the senses will inevitably drag you into the hellish areas of existence. And now we had said that this comes in the category of Shraddha or faith, because uh, the faith at this area is borrowed. So when the instruction is given to control the senses, the desire to control the senses is predicated on one's faith on these instructions. More practically, the desire to control the senses comes from emulating one's spiritual master. So when the disciples see that how their guru is controlling the senses, then they may not have that much faith, but they get inspired by the activities of the spiritual master,
or the activities of other more advanced devotees around them, and they borrow that faith. They say that they are doing it, so they must have faith in this. So let us also do it, even though we not fully understand it. So their faith is borrowed, and then they engage in it. So with this, we end our discussion on the first mantra of the Nectar of Instruction. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.